Hello students, we are going to go ahead and pick up on our lecture notes, chapter 7, page 14. In particular, we're going to be looking at example number 2, where we are graphing a system of inequalities. So taking a closer look, let's inspect that first inequality that we have here. So here we have that y is greater than or equal to an x squared minus 1. I know in particular that this equation or this inequality is going to be a parabola, and the reason I know that is that x squared value here. So now that I know it's going to be a parabola, I'm going to go ahead and use my graphing calculator to help me get some ordered pairs that I can graph easily onto this 10 by 10 graph that I have here on the paper. Now that I have my graphing calculator, I want to go ahead and graph this parabola. So I'm going to go to my y equals. I want to make sure that my plot is off. Notice how it's not shaded. If you went to your graphing calculator and it's shaded on that plot 1, just turn it off by going up and pressing enter and going back down. And that tells you that your plot is off, so you can go ahead and graph and get some data points. So I'm going to go ahead and put in this equation, my x squared minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and go to zoom, and I'm going to go down to zoom standard so I can see at least what this parabola is supposed to be looking like. So it looks like a typical parabola. It looks like it's pretty centered. And so I'm going to go ahead and get some valuable information so I can start plotting some of these points. So I'm going to go ahead and get these points by going to the table. So I'm going to go to second graph, or that blue, which is table. And now I start seeing some of my data points. I see my x values and I see my y values. Notice how my y value here is 24. That's too big. And the reason I say it's too big is because my graph is only a 10 by 10. So the biggest y value that I'll be able to plot is 10. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick a few of these points in order to graph. Now I'll go ahead and write them down on my paper. So I went ahead and I grabbed some of these data points and I put it onto my table, onto my piece of paper here, onto my lecture notes. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and plot these points onto my graph here. So I have a -2, +3, a -1, 0, a 0, -1, a 1, 0, and a 2, +3. Also notice that my inequality here has a line underneath it. So this tells me that I'm going to be having a solid line. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this. Okay. And notice how the inequality is facing towards the right. So this is actually saying greater than or equal. So if something's going to be greater, what you should be thinking about is how to shade. And the way you want to shade if something is greater is you want to shade above. So here, I'm going to just lightly shade above. So shading above is going to be in here. Okay. Now I'm going to be inspecting that second inequality here. So that second inequality, we have an x minus y greater than or equal to a -1. I just go ahead and make sure that this is my first inequality and this is my second inequality. Sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and label so you don't get confused when you're going back looking at your work. So here I don't have any exponents on the x or the y, so it looks like this is going to be a line since my exponents are 1. So if I have y equals mx plus b, that's going to be the easiest way to graph a line if I have it in slope-intercept form. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to have that this is a negative y greater than or equal to a negative x minus 1. So if I multiply everything by negative 1, don't forget that when you multiply by a negative 1, it changes the direction of the inequality. So now I'm going to have y is less than or equal to a positive x plus 1. So here I can use my graphing calculator to grab some points again to help me. So here I'm going to go back to my y equals. I'm going to clear. Now I'm going to put in x. I'm going to plug in x plus 1. I'm going to go ahead and go to my graph. And that's what it's supposed to be looking like. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my second table. So I can go ahead and grab some points here. So just like I did in that first inequality, I'm just going to grab some XY data points and plot them directly onto my lecture notes. So I went ahead and copied some of my data points, some coordinates of x and y on here. So I picked -6, -5, -1, 0, 2, 3, and 6, 7. So I'm going to go ahead and plot these points directly onto my graph here. So I'm going to have a -6, -5. I'm going to have a -1, 0. A +2, +3. And then I have a +6, +7. So I'm going to go ahead, and because I see that this is going to be a solid line, I'm going to go ahead and connect my dots. So there is my line there. Now this inequality is facing towards the left, and this is telling me it's going to be less than or equal. So that tells me that I'm going to be shading below. So if I'm going to be shading below, it's going to be below that black line, and that's going to be here. Remember, we had shaded that first inequality, everything that's going to be above the parabola here. So in particular, we want to know where the purple and the yellow meet. Well, the purple and the yellow meet right at this little intersection, right in here. So where the purple and yellow meet, that little red intersection, that indicates the solution set. And that is how I graphed two linear inequalities.